Ukraine has just rejected President Trump's proposed peace plan. Kyiv says it will not give up Donbass, and instead believes it now has stronger leverage to pressure Moscow. That raises a much bigger question. If the war continues for years, can Europe actually keep Ukraine in the fight? I argue that this is no longer about political promises or public statements. It is about factories, weapons, mobilization, military doctrine, and whether the European Union has the real industrial capacity to support a prolonged war while preparing for its own defense. Official European planning documents reveal a picture that looks very different from the public narrative. Europe has enormous financial resources, but does it have the production, logistics, and military readiness to match them? Today, I'll examine the numbers, the strategy, and the structural weaknesses that could determine not only Ukraine's future, but the balance of power across Europe itself. Hello, I'm Nick. Welcome to GeoX, Global Intelligence. Note, if you enjoy unbiased geopolitical and military analysis, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Now, let's get started. Ukraine has officially rejected President Trump's proposed peace plan. According to reports from American media, Kyiv has no intention of recognizing Russian control over Donbass. Instead, I see Ukraine pursuing tougher negotiating terms and believing its position has become stronger. The message is clear. Rather than making concessions, Kyiv believes it now has greater leverage to pressure Moscow. That tells me one thing. The decision has been made to continue the war. At this point, I don't see any serious movement toward a negotiated settlement. But anyone who has followed this war understands another reality. Ukraine cannot determine its future on its own. Its military campaign depends on foreign financing, foreign weapons, and continued external support. For a long time now, Ukraine has relied on its Western partners not only for military assistance, but also for keeping the state itself functioning. Much of the funding for public institutions, government salaries, healthcare, and education comes from European financial support. Without that assistance, maintaining the country's normal operations would become extraordinarily difficult. That means the real strategic decisions extend far beyond Kyiv. The future of the war increasingly depends on whether Europe's political leadership has both the will and the capability to continue supporting Ukraine for years to come. I also believe President Zelensky has reached an important conclusion. In his view, Washington is no longer willing to force Ukraine into concessions. Instead, he appears to see an opportunity to resist outside pressure and continue pursuing his own strategy. Meanwhile, I see Moscow still investing considerable effort in negotiations with the United States, hoping diplomacy might eventually produce favorable results or delay further escalation. But the battlefield tells a different story. From my perspective, the current military situation offers little evidence that negotiations alone can fundamentally change the balance of the conflict. That shifts the focus away from diplomacy and toward Europe. The core of Ukraine's strategy is straightforward. Europe will help. Europe will provide the money. Europe will provide the weapons. And if necessary, Europe will become increasingly involved in the confrontation with Russia, whether indirectly or, in the worst-case scenario, through a much more direct role. Under this strategy, Ukraine expects to emerge from the war as part of the coalition that ultimately prevails. The costs, casualties, and sacrifices are viewed as secondary to achieving that objective, whether one agrees with this approach or not. That is the strategic assumption behind Kyiv's current course. So the central question is no longer what Ukraine wants. The real question is whether Europe is actually capable of delivering everything this strategy requires. Ukraine's situation raises a fundamental question. If Kyiv is relying on Europe as its main source of support, then Europe's ability to act becomes the decisive factor. A country can have political goals, strategic ambitions, and strong statements. But in a long war, everything eventually comes down to real capabilities. Factories, weapons production, logistics, military readiness. According to my analysis, Ukraine's entire strategy is built on the assumption that Europe will be able to sustain the conflict for several more years. But this is where the most important issue appears. Can Europe actually provide the level of support required? Not just financially, not just politically, but physically. Can European countries produce enough weapons, Ammunition and military equipment? Can they expand production fast enough? Can they maintain long-term military assistance while also preparing their own armed forces for a possible confrontation? These are not questions of political preference. They are questions of industrial capacity. European defense planning documents provide a much more complicated picture than public statements suggest. The European Union has enormous economic resources. Its combined economy is among the largest in the world. But economic size alone does not automatically translate into military power. A modern war is not won only by financial indicators. It requires factories capable of mass production. It requires supply chains. It requires trained personnel. And it requires the ability to replace losses over time. This is the challenge that will determine whether Europe's strategy can succeed. Now let's look at Europe's actual military readiness. According to European defense planning documents, especially the Readiness 2030 concept, the current situation reveals a serious gap between ambitions and real capabilities. Based on operational assessments, Europe's level of combat readiness for a potential conflict with Russia in the near future remains extremely limited. The assessment suggests that European forces are not yet prepared for a large-scale, high-intensity conventional war. This is considered a critical weakness. However, the situation could change by 2030. Under the European Union's defense modernization plans, readiness could increase significantly through expanded military production, stronger logistics networks, and greater investment in defense capabilities. The European Union has major advantages. It has a much larger population. It has a significantly larger economic base. And it has far greater financial resources compared with Russia. If Europe successfully transforms these advantages into military capacity, it could create a strong, defensive structure capable of stopping a conventional attack along its eastern borders. The question, however, is not whether Europe has potential. The question is whether Europe can convert potential into reality quickly enough. Money alone does not create military power. Industrial capacity, manufacturing speed, trained personnel, and strategic planning are what determine whether a country or alliance can sustain a long conflict. Europe's current strategy is built around preparing for the future, but Ukraine needs support in the present. And this creates the central contradiction. The European Union may be able to build a stronger defense system by 2030. But can it provide enough support during the years before that? Because Ukraine's strategy depends on surviving the immediate challenges of the next several years. And that requires not only political commitment, but the ability to produce and deliver everything needed on the battlefield. The main issue is not whether Europe wants to help Ukraine. The main issue is whether Europe has the physical ability to do so. This is a question of real resources. Can European countries produce enough weapons? Can they maintain the supply of ammunition? Can they provide air defense systems, drones, armored vehicles, and other equipment for a war that continues year after year? These are the questions that determine the outcome. Because modern conflicts are not decided only by political declarations. They are decided by production capacity, by logistics, by the ability to replace losses, by the ability to scale up manufacturing when demand increases. European military analysts and political leaders increasingly argue that Ukraine must continue resisting for several more years with European support. The idea is that Europe can help Ukraine maintain its defense while simultaneously rebuilding its own military capabilities. But this strategy depends on one critical assumption, that European industry can expand fast enough. The challenge becomes even greater, because any prolonged conflict creates increasing demands. Weapons are consumed, equipment is destroyed, personnel suffer losses, and every month of war requires more resources than the previous one. At the same time, Europe must prepare for its own security challenges. This creates a difficult balance. Support Ukraine, rebuild European armed forces, increase weapons production, strengthen military infrastructure, all at the same time. The future of this strategy depends on whether Europe can move from political commitments to practical execution. Because a country or alliance cannot fight a long war with statements alone. It needs factories, it needs supply chains, and it needs the ability to keep producing at the required scale. Now we need to look at Europe's ability to Prepare for a long-term confrontation from a purely military and industrial perspective. The problem becomes much clearer when we compare financial power with actual production capability. A large economy does not automatically mean a powerful military-industrial system. For war, the most important things are not only financial indicators. What matters are physical resources: tons of steel, numbers of vehicles, quantity of ammunition, production lines, factories capable of operating continuously. This difference between a financial economy and a production economy has already appeared in previous strategic comparisons. A country can have enormous economic statistics, but if its industry cannot quickly produce military equipment, that advantage becomes limited during a major conflict. Modern warfare requires mass production. It requires the ability to manufacture large numbers of relatively affordable systems, especially now when drones and precision weapons have changed the battlefield. The conflict in Ukraine has demonstrated that technology alone is not enough. Quantity matters. Speed matters. The ability to replace losses matters. This creates a major challenge for Europe. The European economy is heavily focused on services, finance, and high-value specialized products. These sectors create wealth, but they are not designed for rapid military mobilization. A financial transaction can increase economic statistics, but it does not create tanks. It does not create artillery shells. It does not create drones. It does not create the industrial capacity required for a long war. This gap between Europe's financial strength and its real industrial mobilization capability is one of the biggest obstacles to providing Ukraine with unlimited long-term support. The question is not whether Europe has money. Europe clearly does. The question is whether Europe can transform that money into the physical resources needed on a modern battlefield. This industrial gap becomes even more important when we look at the transformation of modern warfare. The war in Ukraine has shown that the battlefield has changed dramatically. A new military reality has emerged. Drones have become one of the most important elements of combat. Low-cost unmanned systems are now capable of destroying expensive military equipment and changing the balance on the battlefield. This creates a serious challenge for traditional military doctrines. For decades, many Western armies focused on highly advanced and extremely expensive platforms. Modern aircraft, precision missiles, network-centered warfare, advanced command systems. The idea was that technological superiority would create dominance on the battlefield. But the current conflict has demonstrated a different reality. A large number of relatively cheap drones can create enormous problems even for advanced military formations. The battlefield has become more transparent. Everything can be detected. Movements can be tracked. Large concentrations of troops and equipment can become targets before they even reach the front line. This creates a major problem for traditional military structures. Heavy and expensive systems may become vulnerable when facing a battlefield filled with thousands of inexpensive drones. The question is not only about having the most advanced technology. The question is whether an army can produce enough systems quickly enough to survive a long war. Modern warfare increasingly depends on scale. It depends on adaptation. It depends on the ability to rapidly develop, manufacture, and deploy new technologies. And this is where the difference between theory and reality becomes visible. A military doctrine designed for a previous era may struggle when confronted with a completely different type of conflict. The next challenge is industrial. For decades, much of Europe's defense industry was designed around producing small numbers of highly sophisticated weapons, modern tanks, advanced missile systems, precision-guided munitions, high-end military technology. This model works well when the objective is to maximize technological superiority. But a prolonged war demands something different. It demands scale. Factories must produce thousands of systems instead of dozens. Production lines must operate continuously. Losses must be replaced immediately. And equipment must remain affordable enough to manufacture in large quantities. This is where Europe faces a difficult transition. Many of its largest defense companies were built around complex, high-margin products. Their business model rewards quality, specialization, and profitability. Mass production requires a completely different industrial philosophy. It demands simpler manufacturing, shorter development cycles, flexible supply chains, thousands of subcontractors, and an industrial workforce capable of rapidly expanding production. The experience of the war in Ukraine has highlighted how valuable inexpensive systems can become. A relatively low-cost drone may destroy equipment worth millions of dollars. That changes the economics of warfare. Success is no longer determined only by building the most advanced weapon. It also depends on producing enough systems to sustain continuous operations. The battlefield increasingly rewards speed, adaptability, and manufacturing volume. Countries that can rapidly redesign products, increase output, and replace losses gain an important strategic advantage. This raises the broader question facing Europe. Can an industrial system, built for limited production, transform itself into one capable of supporting a long, high-intensity conflict? That may become one of the defining strategic challenges of the coming years. The next challenge is industrial. For decades, much of Europe's defense industry was designed around producing small numbers of highly sophisticated weapons, modern tanks, advanced missile systems, precision-guided munitions, high-end military technology. This model works well when the objective is to maximize technological superiority. But a prolonged war demands something different. It demands scale. Factories must produce thousands of systems instead of dozens. Production lines must operate continuously. Losses must be replaced immediately, and equipment must remain affordable enough to manufacture in large quantities. This is where Europe faces a difficult transition. Many of its largest defense companies were built around complex, high-margin products. Their business model rewards quality, specialization, and profitability. Mass production requires a completely different industrial philosophy. It demands simpler manufacturing, shorter development cycles, flexible supply chains, thousands of subcontractors, and an industrial workforce capable of rapidly expanding production. The experience of the war in Ukraine has highlighted how valuable inexpensive systems can become. A relatively low-cost drone may destroy equipment worth millions of dollars. That changes the economics of warfare. Success is no longer determined only by building the most advanced weapon. It also depends on producing enough systems to sustain continuous operations. The battlefield increasingly rewards speed, adaptability, and manufacturing volume. Countries that can rapidly redesign products, increase output, and replace losses gain an important strategic advantage. This raises the broader question facing Europe. Can an industrial system, built for limited production, transform itself into one capable of supporting a long, high-intensity conflict? That may become one of the defining strategic challenges of the coming years. The transformation of warfare is happening much faster than traditional defense industries can adapt. Developing a new military platform through conventional procurement often takes years. Modern drone technology evolves in a matter of weeks or months. By the time one design completes testing, certification, and production approval, the battlefield may already require an entirely different solution. This creates a completely new industrial race. Victory no longer depends only on who develops the most advanced weapon. It increasingly depends on who can innovate, manufacture, and deploy new systems faster than the enemy can respond. That changes the entire logic of military procurement. Long development cycles become a strategic disadvantage. Rapid experimentation becomes a strategic necessity. The countries that succeed will not necessarily be those spending the most money. They will be the ones capable of shortening the path from design to deployment. Engineers must work directly with frontline experience. Factories must be able to reconfigure production almost immediately. Supply chains must remain flexible under constant pressure. This is no longer an industrial challenge alone. It is a challenge involving military doctrine, government institutions, private industry, and technological innovation operating as a single system. The battlefield now rewards speed above perfection. A weapon that reaches the front today may be more valuable than a theoretically superior system delivered 2 years later. That reality is forcing governments across Europe to reconsider how they organize defense production. The central question remains unchanged. Can Europe adapt quickly enough to meet the demands of modern warfare while continuing to support Ukraine and strengthening its own security at the same time? The answer to that question may shape the strategic balance across Europe for years to come.